The Chaotic Touch of Harmony. By Law-Abiding Pony. Chapter 5. Mischief. Fatigue clouded Alexia's judgment as she read Loki's letter a second time before whispering to Conrad. "I'm too tired to deal with this. I'm going to bed." He gave her a look between understanding and discontent. "I'd rather have both of us wake her up here and now. There's no telling what kind of person Loki is or what she'll do." She gave him a blearily once-over of his physique. "You look a lot stronger than she does. You should be able to handle her if she's a baddie. Go wake her up, I'm going to bed." "What about me?" he added before Toon could leave. Alexia stopped in her tracks to face him. "What about you? You would leave a complete stranger and a known criminal to have free rein in your house. I would like to think I can trust you. You're willing to overlook my past, I want to do the same for you. Will you allow me to do that?" Her words cut him deeply as if he was hearing his grandfather speak through her. He was able to keep it from showing much on his face. "Who are you? I do not know why you give it so freely, but I will endeavor to be worthy of your esteem. I will keep watch over our guest." Toon was too tired to properly understand the sentiment and simply nodded before leaving. Conrad couldn't decide if Alexia was being too trusting, or was truly letting him go beyond his past. "She would have never survived in my world. Nor did I for that matter." A peppy voice whispered in his ear. "Hi!" He nearly jumped out of his skin and tried to buck the owner of the voice. Loki bounced back and away from the clumsy strike. "Whoa, easy there, tiger. No need to lop my head off." Conrad moved to block the door. "How long have you been awake?" "Since you two barged your way up the steps." She snickered. "A freight train would have been quieter. No one ever said hooves were made for stealth." He countered. "Then you shouldn't have bothered." She shot back dismissively until her eyes locked onto his wings, and before he could even blink she was at his side pulling one open. "Are you freaking kidding me? You got wings?" He winced in pain at the tugging and thwacked her over the head to remove her. The hit had been intended to cause injury, but it only proved to be a temporary distraction. "Keep your hands to yourself or I'll cut them off." She gave him a smirk. "Fine, I'll keep my hands off you. But someone else beat you to the punch on cutting them off." She waved her hooves at him for emphasis. He growled lightly as he spoke. "Don't get smart with me." He fought to keep the stab of pain from showing as he refolded his overextended wing back into place. "Tell me why I shouldn't have you kicked out of the house." "What? All three of us being horse things isn't enough for you?" He gave her a cold stare. "No. You're such a gentleman," she remarked with her forelegs crossed and her head turned away in faux indignation. His stance loosened slightly. "The more of us there are in one place, the more likely someone will find us. I have no intention on being stuffed and mounted on some rich man's oddities collection. Hey, I was more concerned about getting picked up by a carnival and used as a freak show act. But I do have something to offer if you and your girlfriend let me stay." Conrad forcibly ignored the relationship comment. "I'm listening. See, she's the one with the house, right? And I guess you want to be the dumb muscle or something." He refused to bait it further by her verbal jabbing and said nothing. "Well, I can provide the finances. Anything that can be shipped here I can get it." He was less than convinced. "You have any proof to back up such a claim?" She jumped over to the mass of electronics and revealed them to be several pieces of a single computer crudely secured onto a harness. She shuffled into it but stopped at clicking the buckles in place. "This is the rig I threw together when I found out what was happening to me. It has a satellite uplink instead of having to rely on the horribly lacking cellular network out here. And thanks to the fact that no one cares who or what you look like online, I can shop and hack from anywhere in the world." Her proud boasting faltered slightly. "For about 2 hours if I don't find a power socket. Pushing a signal into space isn't exactly cheap on power, you know." Conrad raised a mocking eyebrow. "I don't care if you're the top hacker on the planet, but you can't do squat with a keyboard anymore, and I don't see a microphone for dictation. Loki lifted her equipment carefully onto the bed and turned it on. You can't blame a girl for wanting to keep a hold of her livelihood. Besides, it turns out these nubs aren't as problematic as you might think. I can actually type faster now than I ever could with fingers. Conrad was losing his patience as Loki waggled her hooves at each other as if they were sock puppets. He looked over at the keyboard and found it was actually in two pieces, presumably so that the normally long board would not interfere with the pony's gait. The buttons were just as small as a normal keyboard, which only pushed him further under the belief that she was insane. I'll be the first to admit I know nothing of hacking, but even I know you can't mash keys together and hope for the best. Have you actually tried? Loki responded in a tone that oozed superiority. I am not in the habit of wasting my time. Get to the point. Loki did not respond until her system was up and running. Get a look at this craziness. She beckoned him over to put the headpiece on. His paranoia was in full swing and he refused to come any closer. She kept waving the headset at him. You didn't really think I'd bring a full-sized screen with me, did you? You have to wear this for me to show you. No. Just tell me. A sourpuss like you won't believe me if I just told you. I need to show. Try me. After getting turned into a pony with wings, my list of believable events has been expanding exponentially. Fine. She replied with an annoyed huff. She grabbed one of the keyboard halves in a hoof and lifted it vertically. What stood out to Conrad was that she grabbed it from above instead of slipping the hoof underneath it. Not only can I grab stuff with a magnetic hoof, but I can type without pressing the keys. I just think of what letters I want to type and they appear on screen. I still have to have my hooves on the board, but it still works all the same. Isn't that the freakiest thing ever? Loki was expecting his jaw to drop on the floor in profound astonishment, followed by him gibbering insane babble about the impossibility of it. Instead, his expression changed little. Did you really have to waste my time trying to set up a demonstration? Her mouth hung open for several seconds, trying to comprehend how he wasn't going bonkers. Just like that? You accept me having a magic freaking hoof? She waved the keyboard at him, begging for a reaction. I have a nearly flat nub where my hand used to be and you just accept it like yesterday's news? There's something seriously wrong with you. She ended with a pout. Alexia already has magic that can levitate and create light. This is comparable to that. He spoke with an almost bored tone that only riled her up further. As for whether or not you can stay, that's ultimately up to her. But I won't hesitate to kick you to the curb if you try anything. He left without another word. Loki watched him go and tried to see how deep the stick was stuck. Probably all the way to his throat. What a jaded jerk. Well, Alex sounds like a fun girl. She yawned and went back to sleep. It was past noon before Alexia arose from the dead. She would have slept longer, but her satellite smartphone's alarm kept her from doing further damage to her sleep cycle. In the zombie state that she was in, she forgot she had company until she walked into the living area and found Conrad watching the news on the TV she never bothered to acknowledge before, and Loki with her face stuffed inside a cereal bowl chewing happily. Conrad pointedly ignored the green mare and gave Alexia a curt nod of greeting. Loki figured if Alexia wanted to talk she would bark at her, so she kept eating while waving a hoof. This barely registered to the unicorn as she grabbed an assortment of food in her magic and plopped down on her favorite lounge chair. The two guests kept their peace, but Conrad had already decided he didn't like Loki, while the mare didn't care over much what he thought. Loki's only concern was getting Toon's blessing to stay. The green mare stole the occasional glance at the bedraggled unicorn. This place is perfect, out of the way, still somewhat near a major highway so it can receive deliveries, and there are 2 other people like me here so I don't get isolation sickness. She regarded the brown Pegasus. Even if someone around here is enough of a grouch to put the Grinch to shame. Loki's interest zeroed in on the tome that was floating above Toon's head, even though the unicorn seemed oblivious to it. Her eyes darted between the 2 other ponies and the floating book that begged her to look inside. Just play it cool, and win her over first. She was about to voice a question when Conrad unmuted the commercials. Welcome back to Channel 5 Hardliner News Network. It's time for the morning news annihilation. The upbeat male anchor shuffled his papers and gave an oily smile to the camera. The Russian embassy in Egypt came under terrorist attack yesterday, 2 days earlier than the announced attack planned by radical group Ka'ijamad. The Russians are anything if not good at information control and were already aware of the preemptive attack and suffered almost no casualties. Not exactly a big surprise with that one, folks. Moving on, the mounting fuel crisis around the world has forced NASCAR to more than double the price of admission to the Indy 500 over the past year. Makes me glad I'm a baseball fan. He deadpanned before shifting to a new camera. The doomsday clock is ticking. The meteor that's threatening the world's oceans is closing in and the retail market for the Pacific coast is plummeting. Sources say if things keep going the way they are, we might hit a second recession irregardless of assurances from the UN and White House saying the big rock in the sky won't cause any damage. Just do what I do, folks, wait till splash down then gobble up all the cheap land. He switched back to a third camera and discarded the papers. Speaking of sources, more of them tell me missing person cases are on the upswing across the globe. People you wouldn't expect, scientists, doctors, chiefs of police, all acting strange for a day or two then poof gone. Personally I think it's people across the board, but who would report about busboys or teachers getting nabbed unless it was somebody's grandma? Moving on to today's vocabulary. Conrad hit the mute button and looked begrudgingly at both mares. Did you hear that? That might be proof this ponification thing is more widespread than any of us thought. Alexia was contemplatively silent while Loki was partially dismissive. So what? You wanna play hero samurai boy? He growled slightly at the hacker but said nothing as his gaze fell on Toon. She felt out of her element at the attention. What? I don't know, I was just a mailman before all this. I've been playing it all by ear since I got here. Loki's attention shifted to focus squarely on her. A mailman? How did you get a hold of this mansion this? Alexia grew slightly defensive. Never mind that. Why are you eating my food? Loki wanted an answer but thought better of pressing for one. Cause I can provide financial support by way of my various overseas bank accounts and my baller hacking abilities. Your pad, my money, it's a win-win for both of us. That piqued Toon's interest. How much money? 75 grand as of right now. Loki boasted proudly. Given that I had to pay 200 to get out of Denver and keep the taxi's mouth shut about the talking pony in the back seat, I'd say I came out on top. But so long as I can stay here, I can keep my operations up and running, I can supply the cash. And what happens when the feds track you back here? Conrad butted in with a sneer. As if I'd let them. Loki rebuked. I have my ways, but trust me. No one will ever find us thanks to any of my doing. Alexia munched on a carrot in contemplation. I'm down to my last 2,000 after express shipping the food and paying off Qbert for the month's rent. Why is it my luck that I had to be surrounded by criminals? Would it kill Lady Luck to send me a school teacher or an accountant? Actually, with her sense of humor, the teacher would be a disciplinarian and the accountant would be an embezzler. I don't see any reason to refuse you. Welcome aboard, Loki. The green pony pumped a hoof. Dura. Easy as piggybacking the neighbor's Wi-Fi. If you have a list of stuff you need shipped to the house, write it up and I'll have the trucks on their way by morning. How exactly are we going to write anything without thumbs, brainiac? Conrad quipped with a sneer. Loki stared daggers at him, but Alexia was oblivious to the heated exchange and replied excitedly. I was going to spend the day making a monocrystal, but I really should learn how to write with my telekinesis. I hope you can read chicken scratch. The green mare warmed to both the idea and the unicorn. Pshaw. Don't worry about it. My friends used to say my writing was its own language. She finished off the dry cereal and flipped the bowl to land on her head. Don't give it to me before 5 though. I have some things that need doing. She began to scamper off with the bowl over her head when Conrad yelled at her. "Wait!" She tilted her head with an amused smile. "How did you know this house was occupied by a fellow pony without meeting her first?" Alexia turned to listen for that answer as well. Loki's smile stretched further. "Oh, that's easy. The horse smell is everywhere and this place doesn't have a stable. Don't tell me you two can't smell it." Toon coughed sheepishly. "Yeah, sorry. The water was off for a couple of days so I wasn't able to bathe." Loki chuckled good-heartedly. "Good thing you couldn't. I would have cleaned the fridge out and left if it hadn't been for the smell. No offense," she added at the last minute. "Anyway, I'd love to stay and chat, tea, biscuits, the whole shebang, but I got work to do." Conrad watched Loki leave with a neutral expression. "Toon, what you said last night? About Pegasi being able to fly?" Alexia was finishing off the last of her brunch. "What about it? Did your book say anything about them needing any sort of assistance? Magical or otherwise?" She scratched her head while lowering the book to eye level and pressing her hoof against it to open the lock. "Aside from what naturally occurs in their body, no, but it did allude to some individuals having a poorly developed itinerous system, the whole thing with the carbuncle I told you about. That's what allows you to cast magic, right? That's what generates the magic, yes." The book had diagrams of the typical layouts for the three tribes and her eyes dilated to an extreme level with a grin to match. "Can I see your itinerous system? Please." He balked at her, charging him with her forelegs clasped together pleadingly. "What exactly would you need to do? It's simple, really." She grinned fiercely at the opening. "I just need to add an expansion clause to the inner sight spell, basically making it an outer sight. The only problem is that it only works with physical contact." "Yeah, simple." He deadpanned. He doubted Toon would intentionally cause harm. "What do I have to do?" "Just relax and take deep breaths." Once both of them were comfortable and sitting across from each other on the sofa, she placed a hoof on his withers and took one long breath. At the exhale she opened her eyes and he was taken aback by the solid azure glow they had taken on. Conrad's carbuncle was roughly half as bright as Alexia's own. However, Alexia was not concerned about that, as the diagram said that was the typical baseline between unicorns and Pegasi. As expected, his capillaries were extremely dense in his wings and moderately so in his hooves and legs. The rest of his body had less than a fifth of the density Toon possessed. The book says he can get away with that because his body doesn't need magic for daily survival. What Alexia had not expected was that the alteration to the spell allowed Conrad to see her itinerous system as she did his. The sheer brilliance of the mare's itinerous system made her almost painful to look at, but he refused to show weakness by turning away. With the spell at work, many of the capillaries along her front were pulsing and the horn itself was a blinding strobe light that mesmerized him the longer he looked at it. Eventually she broke contact and levitated the book over to study the diagrams. "Looks to me like you're perfectly okay. You should be able to fly just fine once you get the technique down. But I'm sorry to say this is a book on magic, not Pegasus flight." Her words broke him out of his stunned paralysis. "We should consider ourselves fortunate we have the tome at least. But it makes me wonder," he added in a quizzical tone. He got off the sofa to practice flexing his wings to get a better feel for their movements while she retrieved the spell book. "About what?" He inclined his head towards a window to get her to follow him. "What is your impression of the book's author?" Toon rubbed her chin for a moment. "Princess Twilight Sparkle is her name. She comes across as extremely CDO." Conrad gave her a confounded look. Which, to put it in her words, would translate to, CDO is like OCD but is in alphabetical order, as it should be. "Ah," he replied flatly. "So as you can imagine she is very meticulous and thorough, which is really helpful given the role she plays as instructor." "What about disposition?" he interjected. "Does she seem kind or cruel? I get the impression she's a rather benevolent person. If you're asking whether she's behind us becoming ponies, I highly doubt it, at least not unless she went over to the dark side after writing the book. The pair were on the back porch now and Alexia came to a stop at the steps at the gate. I haven't seen anything in the author's notes that point to this being her doing, intentional or otherwise. As to why I have the book, your guess is as good as mine. But for now you need to learn how to fly. Conrad extended his wings and studied them. They seem far too small to actually work though. She gave him a look somewhere between disbelief and condescension. I levitate stuff with a spike on my head and you're worried about shortish wings being able to keep you in the air. Point taken. He conceded. Well, get to flapping. I'll try to catch you in my magic to keep you from falling too hard. He grinned appreciatively. Thanks, I feel I'm going to need it. No need to rush it. I'm right here to catch you. Toon said reassuringly. Conrad nodded to hide his nervousness and flapped moderately hard once and managed to flip himself up and over his head and almost crashed on his back, but felt as if he was lying on a cushion of air. I got ya. He was flipped right side up again and back on his hooves. Thanks. Suddenly I got a lot lighter when I started flapping. I read about that. She replied matter-of-factly. Pegasi control the effect of gravity on their bodies while in flight. It's one of the ways they can get away with such a small wing-to-body ratio. Conrad accepted the comment as truth and tried again, only this time keeping his wings angled back. His efforts were punished by him falling backwards and again being caught in Toon's aura. How long did it take you to learn to control magic? So I can get a rough estimate on how long it will take me to learn how to fly. She scratched the back of her head and sat on the grass to give the question some thought. I don't know how translatable learning magic and flight are between each other, but I can say this much. So far my magic has been difficult to get started. I studied the hell out of the theory of the spells before trying them, and then when actually trying them I couldn't make it work. I tried forcing and pushing the spell out, but all I got was a headache for my efforts. It was only after the first few hours of floating stuff around the house that I realized that I didn't have to think about the spell to make it happen. All I have to do is to want the object to float or to want some light and poof, the spell activates. Toon faced Conrad with a friendly smile. I think that's because light and telekinesis is simple stuff for unicorns in the same way flight is simple for Pegasi. I'm sure stuff like, I don't know, fireballs and teleportation would require concentration just like acrobatic flying would for you. She closed her eyes and moved her hoof in a sweeping arc motion. Don't tell your wings what to do, let them do the talking. I think I know what you're getting at. Without trying to guess which way his wings should be tilted, he unfolded them and gave several gentle flaps and found himself floating several feet above the ground. "Oh, how do I get down?" His legs started to flail and his once steady hover began to wobble. "See?" Toon called up from below. "Don't think about it, just do it. Relax." She tried to think of a quick analogy he would be familiar with. Like getting into a firing stance with a pistol. The analogy worked and he stopped trying to steady himself and he let his body adjust naturally to hovering flight. Slowly, all of what Toon said started to click into place. When Conrad wanted to climb, he instinctively knew what angle and tempo to keep his wings at. As the hours progressed he learned to trust his instincts that told him to level out his wings and bank into them to make sharp turns. That is not to say it was flawless progression. In the span of a few short hours he collided with the ground and the house more times than Alexia could keep count, no matter how many times she tried to catch him in her magic. If there was a trait the two shared, it was stubbornness, and once he got a taste of flight, he could not escape it until mastery was his. It was past 7 that night when Conrad came in for the 87th crash landing of the day. His coat was in patches along the left side of his barrel and in clumps on his right legs, but so far he managed to avoid breaking any bones. He did however have several cuts, scraps, and a couple of gashes wrapped in linen. Alexia galloped over to the dazed stallion who was shakily climbing to his hooves. "How'd I do, Ma?" he asked in a tone that would have made her worry about a concussion if not for the wink he gave a moment later. Once she understood he was teasing her, Alexia snickered and tapped him on a shoulder that still had intact fur. Not bad all considering. I should count myself lucky. All I had to deal with to learn magic was some frustration and headaches, not full body bruising and blood everywhere. The mention of the bruises caused his thus far ignored injuries to throb, and he hissed in pain and gently rubbed a sore foreleg. I want to thank you for your assistance with this. You helped me and ask for nothing in return. Why? Why help someone like me? Toon felt controlled grief behind Conrad's stoic visage. She didn't know how, but she could tell the Pegasus assumed Alexia was only helping him because they were both ponies. She brought her hoof up from his shoulder to his cheek and gave a compassionate smile. Conrad, I would have helped you if you had been man, woman, pony, or human. I saw you were in danger and I helped you. I'll admit I had to get over the shock of witnessing death firsthand, but I wasn't going to let that man take you. After that you've proven to be a good man with a bad past. You should heed your grandfather and not let your past dictate your future. He was at a loss for several seconds until he hung his head. I think your way with words was wasted as a mail carrier. They shared a chuckle. I better go tell Loki to add medical supplies to the list. I'll meet with you later, okay? I'd appreciate that. His eyes lingered on her as she entered the house. To think Grandpa, the kind of woman you always told me to watch for wouldn't be human at all. It was barely past 8 when Alexia cantered into Loki's room. The green mare had taken over the room completely with her readjustments to the decor. She was sitting on the bed with both halves of the keyboard under her hooves and the headset on her brow with a look of intense concentration. Yet. Take that, you two-dime harlot. I bet you couldn't even catch a 2-year-old script kiddie. Toon hesitated at the door. Is now a bad time? Nope. Gimme a sec, aeon done. She cheered and tossed the helmet off. You're looking at the girl who jacked a cool $250,000 from the Syndico family's Brazil account. All that is left is to let the scripts run from the zombies and keep the uplink down to clean up behind me, and no one will be able to track it back here. Oh. Toon replied, having no clue as to what any of that meant. I take it they were a bunch of jerks. Loki gave a very equine snort. Who isn't nowadays? But enough about that, you got the list of stuff you need. Toon levitated a rolled up piece of paper and handed it over to Loki's awaiting hoof. My horn writing is as bad as I thought it was going to be. Loki scrunched her face at the scribbling and tossed it back at the unicorn. You got that right. You can just tell me what you need. But while you do... She gave Alexia a sidelong glance with a smirk as she re-equipped her computer harness. I couldn't help but notice when I was scavenging around the house yesterday that I came across a wallet. It had a driver's license with an unmarried guy by the name of James Toon. That wouldn't be you, would it? Toon was only mildly surprised. I thought Conrad would have told you last night. But yes, I used to be James Toon. We need some first aid supplies. Loki waved a dismissive hoof. It'll take a few hours for the zombie scripts to do their thing to keep any backtracks from worming their way here, so I can't bring the uplink online for an hour or so. She replied hastily so she could get back to her more interesting topic. So tell me. Have you tried it? Tried what? Alexia replied while tilting her head a bit. Loki grinned. I shouldn't have to spell it out for you. I mean, have you tried masturbating? She smirked, expecting Toon to say no. Actually I have. She replied with shaky conviction. Loki was dumbstruck for several seconds before she started clapping her hooves. Bravo! I didn't think an unwilling tranny would give it a go. Alexia grimaced but said nothing. By your face I'd say you didn't have much success. Toon colored but did not look away. No, I didn't. I can imagine. What did you use? A hoof? Carrot? Banana? A dildo? Loki was impressed. You continue to surprise me, Alex. She cleared her throat. Yeah, well, I wasn't exactly thinking clearly when I bought them. Loki gasped. Them? As in more than one. She leapt across the room and wrapped her forelegs around Toon's neck. Tell me you didn't use all the ones you bought, please. I need release. These hooves just don't cut it, you know. Yeah, sure, I can go get them. She replied while prying the earthmare's legs off her neck and bolted to her room. I'll love you until the end of time. She called out to the unicorn, who disappeared into her room. Alexia found the purple bag and the 2 clean phallic canes still in their wrappers and galloped back to Loki's room. Here, you can have them. Loki rushed over and dug into the floating bag and held the bigger of the 2 flesh spires in her hoof. A savage grin and manic giggles erupted from her maw as she sat on her haunches and started stroking it lovingly. Oh, Mama's going to have such fun with you. Oh yes, she is. And you're going to be such a dirty nasty boy. Alexia raised an eyebrow out of awkwardness and amusement. I don't think I was ever that happy to see anything in my life. Loki broke eye contact with the phallic monument and wrapped her right leg around Toon's neck while holding onto the dildo on the left hoof. You know what, Alexia? I already decided to like you, but now I know for sure you're alright. And for that I want to teach you how to use this. Alexia forced a smile and levitated the bag further away from her face. Thanks for the offer, but I'll pass. If I learned how to do it as a man, I can learn how to do it as a mare. Loki leaned into her face. What's wrong? Don't like women anymore? She sneered at Toon nervously. Or is your last failure with these things holding you back? As she spoke, she gently pressed the rubber spear against the base of Alexia's glowing horn and pushed it up towards the tip. The movement sent a jolt of pleasure so strong from horn to groin that her eyes rolled back and a sultry moan escaped her lips. Loki was shocked by it as well and stepped back to see what happened. You okay there, girl? Toon blinked to clear her vision and regain her wits as her magic went out and rubbed the base of her horn. Yeah, I am fine. That felt, wow. What did you do? Loki looked down at the discarded purple bag and put the numbers together. Before I say anything, pick the bag back up. Alexia put her hoof back down and grabbed the bag with her magic. With a Cheshire grin, Loki gently rubbed Toon's horn with a hoof, this time in a slow teasing fashion. The unicorn was left panting and Loki could smell Alexia's labia. Oh! My! God! She fell on the ground laughing so hard she ignored Alexia's protests when she recomposed herself and asked what was so funny. The green mare was in tears for 3 minutes until she was finally able to formulate a clear response. You never lost your pecker, Alex. She taunted while stabbing a hoof at her horn. He just moved to your forehead. Wahaha. Alexia was not amused.